using microphones because we were recording it. And I told Carolyn I met Saturday and sort of planned a little bit. And I read this statement: nothing lasts but change. And I thought, nothing lasts but change. And if you stop and think, of course, us that are older have had more change, and I don't do change well. You know, I like things to stay the same. And this is a girl who lived here, then Panama City, then Atlanta, then Tampa, back here. But I still say I hate change. But change is going to come. And I asked Carolyn, I lost my mama, I've lost my daddy, I've lost my grandparents, but I haven't lost my husband. And I know a form of loss. I know both my parents had cancer. I took care of both of my parents. I know that. You know, but one of the things I do know about loss, we talked about this, is loss changes you forever. It either changes you one direction or it changes you in another. I told Carolyn, I said, you know, when my mom died, I couldn't pray. And I thought, what's wrong with me? I can't pray. I can't talk to the Lord. What's wrong with me? And I didn't even begin to understand at that time what grief really was. But I became very acquainted with it. But Carolyn and I talked about Saturday, something I wanted us to discuss tonight, are the kind of the stages of grief and the stages of heartache. And I want to include in loss not just losing a husband or wife. We lose in a divorce. We lose. You know, we lose a child. It's a loss. There are different kinds of loss, but in loss, there's grief. There's grief. And we want to talk about tonight the stages of grief. And Carolyn, when John had cancer, we had just moved back here. And I said, God's timing was perfect. So I'm so glad I got to walk that journey with Carolyn, because I know she would walk it with me. And I'm so thankful I got to do that. Carolyn, can you tell these girls what it was like? Let's go back to the diagnosis at Tulane. Let's go back to Tulane and tell me about your driving back, some of the things you shared with me.
John was at Tulane because they were hoping to qualify him for a liver transplant. He had been battling liver disease for, actually we found out for over 30 years, but we became aware of it about 10 years before he died, and had various treatments and medical procedures. And so we, at this found out that they had found a spot on his liver. The doctors had said, well, this is your golden ticket, because it puts you at the very top of the transplant list. This is a good thing. And you know, kind of like, well, this is so paradoxical. You're telling me cancer is a good thing, but we also knew that my husband could not go much longer with the liver that he had, and it's difficult to qualify for a liver transplant. And so we were getting ready to qualify for a liver transplant, which in itself is, you know, getting a house is easy in comparison to qualifying. And he started bleeding internally, and we took him over to the lake, and then the lake transferred him to Tulane. And that's when they started running more tests. And at first the doctors were very positive, you know, he looks good, he's going to qualify for the transplant, he's healthy in every other respect. If you had ever seen John, nobody ever knew how sick he was. Mm-hmm. People would, even up to the last 2 months, they would be shocked. They would never know, doctors included. They would look at him and say, you don't look like the man on this chart. And we always knew that was the Lord's hand on John. But the Friday, the doctor came in, and he had his little iPad, and he sat on the bed, and his comment was so strange, was you either don't have enough cancer or you have too much. And he started looking at the shadow. He says, I don't think this is cancer, but some of the other specialists are thinking that it is. But I drove home. John was at Tulane. Of course, we live in Prairieville, so I was making the drive every day into New Orleans. And I was driving back home over, the spillway there. And I believe that the Lord began preparing me. And I guess I knew, as much as I was driving home pleading with the Lord that John was going to be healed, the Lord was just preparing me that the diagnosis was going to be the cancer was too much. He would not qualify for the liver transplant. And one of the things I had, I just went through a period, all I did was listen to praise and worship music. I didn't listen to anything else in the song, even if the healing doesn't came on the radio, and just really ministered to me that even if the healing doesn't come, that God is still God, He's still good, and that it would be okay. Not things that you want to think about whenever you realize that if the cancer is too much for the transplant, that was a very bad thing, because primary liver cancer has a very, very poor prognosis. It's 6 to 12 months, and that's basically what John did end up staying alive for. So I would like to say I stayed there in that frame of mind. I didn't, and I know Pam, I'm going to talk about it, but you go through different emotions and you go back and forth from this can't be happening to this I'm very mad at God, and to resentment, to just all kinds of different feelings.
And the first stage of grief is called denial. And it's almost like a defense mechanism that serves as a buffer. And in our talking on Saturday, and we've talked about this even before then, but how she remembers going through being at the lake and them recommending hospice and moving him to hospice, then moving him home. And explain just a little bit, Carolyn, about that buffer place you were in. Like, denial is a word, shock, or however, kind of like you explained it to me.
Since Saturday I've thought about it more and more, and the best analogy I can make is, when you were a little kid and you dive into the pool and sit on the bottom of the pool, and you'd be aware of everything that was going on outside the pool, but it was very muffled through the water. That's how I felt about life. And I believe it was the Lord's protection, because it's too overwhelming. And so I felt that I was viewing all of life through this cocoon of water. And I went through the motions, kind of like, I was having an out-of-body experience. So I talked about I could see myself making plans, dealing with the things that you have to deal with, and thank God that you and Preacher were there, because just the things that you were able to do, even with helping me with funeral, the arrangements you have to make at your lowest point in life. I can't even begin to tell you how difficult it is, what you have to deal with when you don't want to make one more decision. You don't want to deal with it. You just want it to go away. But it's also that the Lord's protection, that I remember being at the funeral home and person after person coming up, and it went on for hours, and I was very, very thankful, but I really can't remember that. I can see myself doing it, but it's not like I participated in it.
Yeah, I at the viewing the night before, that's kind of like a Southern term, isn't it, the viewing, I counted and quit counting, over 300 people came through out of their love for John and Carolyn and both. And I said, what a testimony. These 44 years in the ministry, Richard's done funerals. We had a funeral one time. It was Richard and me, the body, and one family member. So I've seen the full swing, but I'm telling you, seeing all those people lined up to say something to Carolyn. And I told Carolyn, I said, when John was in hospice and we were leaving one day, Rich and I were leaving, I just felt the Holy Spirit say, tell her you'll help her do the funeral. And I remember saying, can I help you do the funeral? And she said, yes. And so I just started going to funeral home after funeral home, trying to get the best price. And I remember how fatigued she was. And that's, I think somebody who has they can be taken suddenly or they can be taken over a period of time, over a period of weeks. Fatigue always comes in, extreme fatigue, sleeplessness, to where you are so tired that if you hadn't just lost your loved one, you have to make a decision. And seeing Carolyn sitting at that funeral home, Carolyn and Amy and me and this precious lady from the funeral home, and they'd ask Carolyn a question, she'd look at me and Amy like, I don't know. And it was really a lesson for me. I've done it before, and I've been through this process with people before, but my heart was just aching seeing her like this, knowing she had lost her partner, and he was such the social part of the couple. He was the magnet that party and fun and laughter. So to me, I think it's wonderful that there's a place that authors can call it denial, and another author could call it something else, but it is protection at the onset of loss. It's a buffer, because I don't think our heart can take it. I don't think our heart can take it full on. And everybody takes loss different. And there is no magic wand to be waved over. I asked Carolyn, I said, what about this second stage, Carolyn? I said, I think I could probably relate to this stage more than anything with anybody, is as denial begins to wane, then anger begins to stand up. And anger begins to become a reality. And I'm so glad that God put a scripture in the Bible for us. Be angry and sin not. Because he knew when denial begins to wear off, anger comes in. Tell us about the doctors and things like that. That makes it real to me.
I had anger at a number of people. A lot of anger towards the doctors. I like to say I have forgiven everyone. However, I have absolutely no offense, Jenny, no trust in the medical profession whatsoever. I think there's a reason we say that they're practicing medicine, because they're truly just practicing. They still don't have it right. There are many, many fine doctors, and God did send a doctor that I said was my angel during all of it. But there were some key doctors that I felt, because the decisions they made at a time when my husband and I needed support. The outcome would not have been different, but I needed an anchor in the medical profession. One of the things that happens is when they realize that there's nothing left that they can do for you, they don't want to deal with you anymore. And they kind of push you to the side. And my husband, the last couple months of his life, he began to look like somebody who was dying of end-stage liver cancer. And the time he needed the support of the doctors the most was the time that they were not there, and we could not get any help, compassion, just, tell us what to do for these simplest things. And it was very hard. And his final hospitalization at Lady of the Lake, I believe the Lord sent to us. His name is Dr. Cantro, and he is the head of palliative care at the Lady of the Lake, and he was the first doctor that began to talk about hospice with us. And that's a difficult word. But he was my angel of mercy, and he really helped us navigate some difficult times. So I had a lot of anger towards doctors, from everything from not being honest with us to deserting us to you name it. And then I got angry at God, and the what ifs, the what if this had happened? What if we had pursued this instead of that? And as I talked to Miss Pam, I can't say I went from denial to anger and never back to denial. I would go back and forth between the two. And what I felt is that the Lord allows us to feel what we can handle, and then he protects us again. And then he lets us feel a little bit more, and then he protects us again. And that's what I felt in my life, that because I had to work out the anger, but he didn't want it to destroy me. So he would let me feel a little bit, and then it would be that little cocoon again.
Yeah. I remember when John was in his last few days at the Lady of the Lake. And I remember going to the hospital, and the loss for to know what to do, and no real guidance. If I could tell anybody anything, everybody needs a doctor that's the central point of their, like a family doctor or some kind of anchor. They can ask all these questions. You can't believe it. I mean, they are coming in and doing tests, draining this, doing this, and very little information. And I remember one day he had a test. I can't remember what it was. And I went with you to get the results, went to that room. That doctor was very caring.
Dr. Majoria.
Yeah. He
did the Yttrium 90, the radiation treatment.
He was, and you just soak it up. Yeah. You know, in med school and in nursing school, whatever school. And Kim's a hospice nurse. Her training is this. Just think about that person there. They don't know these terms. They don't know what this means. They don't know what to expect. And I watched. It was confusing. It was so confusing. You know, it seemed like nobody wanted to do the bottom line and say, this is the end. You know, everybody kind of like handed the ball off, so to speak. But the day the doctor came in and talked about hospice, there was a relief. You had an answer. Not the answer you want, but you had an answer.
Dr. Cantro, I felt, made the perfect analogy. I'm not here to bash doctors, but I feel that the modern medical establishment is now in a mode, and Dr. Cantro used this analogy, you know, our life is like a plane taking off. And, you know, we have birth, and there's going down the runway, and you take off, and you get lift, and you're flying along at a certain altitude, and every once in a while you have a little turbulence, and the doctor comes and gets you back on track and says, but there's a point, and as a Christian, I believe that is appointed unto us this day, that plane is coming into land. And the modern medical establishment's philosophy is, I'm going to keep this plane up at all cost. Mm-hmm. I don't care if it's just barely above the ground. I'm keeping it flying, and then when it crashes, it's going to crash and burn, and oh well, I kept it up. And he says that is something that has happened in the past 100 years. And said the whole attitude of palliative care and hospice is now the embracing that it's time for the plane to land. And so just like when you're on an airplane, there's things that you do. It's time to put my tray up, to get my seat back in the upright position, to make sure my seatbelt is securely fastened so we can come in for a good landing. And whenever he talked to my husband and me about the choice for hospice, he was the first person that had said the plane's coming in. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know when and where. But what is the choice of what do you want that landing to look like? Yes. Do you want it to be around with your family and loved ones, or do you want it in a hospital hooked up to tubes and machines? Because the modern medical establishment is we're going to try and keep this thing up in the air. And it was very difficult. My husband is the eternal optimist. Mm-hmm. The cup was always half full. I was the realist. No, it is, almost half full, but it's about 5 millimeters, a little bit less. I'm going to tell it the way it is. Yeah. But it had gotten to the point that I knew that I could not take care of him at home without assistance. And but he was not willing to use that word hospice. And one of the other places I had anger was towards other Christians.
I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah.
Now, I think in anger there's like a bargaining, and this is where I really want to touch on this, because of all the things I observed in their journey, this was a part I hadn't been through before on this great of a scale. There are going to be in your journey, whatever your loss is, there's going to be people who will say things to you. They don't know how foolish it is. And it could be, you pray hard enough, you pray long enough, you claim it, you believe it. Everybody does not get healed on earth. That's a faux pas to believe that everybody is going to be healed. If that was true, there would be nobody in hospitals, because I would make sure hospitals were empty if praying for them is what got them out of the hospital. Does God heal? Yes, He does. Does sometimes He heal? Yes, He does. Does God answer prayer? Always. It might not be exactly in the bent and slant we want it, but God does answer. But what I observed were people who loved John, who bombarded Carolyn with, "Where is your faith?" And here you are, exhausted. Your husband is terminal, and somebody is saying, "Where is your faith?"
And it came from various places. Unfortunately, it came from within John's family, the greatest, and it created confusion for John. I believe that in some ways, having an illness that is coming to the end is in some ways a gift. You have time to say goodbye to people.
Yeah.
But because of what was being said to my husband by well-meaning Christians, the attitude became, well, you can't say goodbye, because if you did, you give up. That means you're giving up. And if you give up, that means you don't have faith. And if you don't have faith, then God is not going to heal you. And it became very, very detrimental. And it wasn't until my husband was actually at the carpenter's house, because he went from Lady of the Lake to the carpenter's house, and then he came home for his final couple of days, that he finally did realize. And his request to me was, I don't want to talk to that person, because this person is too difficult for me to deal with. And so I had anger, which on top of everything else, this is the last thing in the world you need to be dealing with. And if I've learned anything, don't what not to say to somebody who has been diagnosed with cancer, please don't tell them, well, if you eat this food, you'll be okay. Because now it's like your fault. You just didn't eat a healthy enough diet. Or if you had done this, or if you'd have enough faith. I mean, there are so many things I would say, just if just all you want to say is, I love you and I'm praying for you, and what can I do for you?
Yep. That's it.
Yeah, but don't try and make sense of it, because sometimes there is no sense.
The whole process with John, I felt like that I was the anointed referee. And I would say, okay, Carolyn, who do you now want to talk to? Just tell me, and it will be done. And I had the opportunity to say, stop this. Stop this. This is not your husband. Your heart breaks. Her heart is breaking. The last thing you want to think is, I didn't do something right. I didn't make a right decision. I didn't take him to the right doctor. I didn't get the right medicine. We didn't believe enough. We didn't pray enough. We didn't anoint enough. It will make you so weary that you don't even have the strength to even be there for your person, your friend, your family member that's passing away. I want Carolyn to talk about this because I think, and she told me, Carolyn and I thought about this week. She said, Pam, I don't want to be stuck in the grieving process to where I can't go. And she said, a lot of what happens to you in the grieving process is choice. Carolyn, tell some of the things you told me about the depression that comes on you. Kind of not all the anger and bargaining and denial. They don't just go, you're finished with this stage, you're finished with this stage. You go back over and visit this stage a little bit. But the depression, that's what all people who lose a partner or a child have, a battle of depression. We'll talk about that in a minute.
I am not a person that is typically lends myself to depression.
Definitely
I'm
not.
just not. But I found myself, and it was always on the weekends. For me, work was a refuge. I was given a lot of advice, well, don't go back to work until such and such a time. And I did stay home for a couple of weeks after John passed away. I needed to go back to work. And because when I was at work, I had to focus on work, and sometimes it was really hard. And I would sit at my desk and go, I know I'm supposed to be doing something with this. Don't know what, but I know I'm supposed to be doing something with this. So let me sit here for a minute and I'll remember. But while I was at work, I did not have to think about all of the other things that were bothering me. And I would make it through the week, and, you know, I would be good. And then Saturday would roll around, and it would all come crashing in. The hardest hour of the week was church, because I always went to church with my husband. And to all of a sudden be sitting in church without my husband, I would get depressed. I would get angry. There were a couple of times I almost walked out, because I really did want to scream at people. I wanted to throw something at them, and my Bible at them, and say, why are you so all happy and raising your hands? Don't you know my husband died? And
I can see that.
Yeah. Don't you know I'm out here by myself?
Yeah.
Don't come up to me and tell me, oh, God bless you, I'm so happy to see you. I'm going to slap you silly if you do. You know, leave me alone. I didn't want anybody around me. And I actually had to begin changing my routines. John and I always went to church. I would say always, typically on Saturday nights, we would go out to dinner, we would go to church, then we'd go to Walmart. You know, what a spiritual thing to do after church. I guess you got to get enough, you know, God in you to handle Walmart. I found I could not do that. I could not go to church on Saturday night, and I had to start going. I started going on Sunday mornings, anything to break up that routine. And I literally, for months, this summer I went to church on Saturday night thinking all would be well, and it was as bad as it had been right after my husband passed away. And it's only in the past couple months that I've been able to go back to church on a Saturday night and say it's okay. But the depression is overwhelming, and the only thing that got me out of it was, and I realized why work was such a refuge, is that it gave me a sense of purpose, that God wasn't done with me yet. And so, but, on the weekends, I had to really, okay, I need to do something. Otherwise, I will lie here and never get up. I'll lie on the couch from Friday night till Sunday night when I go to bed if I don't make myself get up. I won't brush my teeth. I won't wash my face. I'll just sit here and, I don't know if you ever saw that movie, P.S. I Love You. I probably stink it by the end of the weekend. And if I did not make myself get up.
So so in the depression, there's unless you've ever done this, right after somebody passes away, you have monumental decisions to make. So I don't think in the beginning you're able to even comprehend that you're going to be depressed. But I think as the process goes on, you told me that you could feel the depression lifting. Was that in October?
It was in the fall.
And almost a year.
Almost a year. I don't know why or what, but it was really funny. Amy was the one that said, "You're doing better, Mom." And I had to stop and think about it and go, I am. It was not as bad. And it didn't happen overnight. But it was this fall that I could feel it lifting. Now, I wish I could say I never have my moments where it's bad again. And I never know what's going to trigger it. I was in Romania right before Christmas, and I had a horrible, horrible night. A horrible night. Why? I was never in Romania with my husband. I don't know. But it was just overwhelming. I spent most of the night crying. And then you get up the next day because you have to, and everything gets better again.
Now, this is something that if we're not careful, I consider myself a very non-traditional Christian. I consider myself a person who there is no perfect path to get through anything like this. And I learned early in the ministry, when somebody loses somebody, sometimes it's best to say nothing. Just your presence is enough. We had a family in our church in Panama City. Their little boy drowned. And we got word of it, and the paramedics, we got there close to when the paramedics were there. And Richard, I sort of stood back, and Richard went over, and the dad was on the ground crying into his hands. And Richard went there, sat on the ground, put his arm around him, said nothing. Because our filter is not working good when our heart's breaking. Whether it's a divorce, losing a partner, a child, whatever, there's all kind of loss. But our filter doesn't work good. And so sometimes all we need is to take a bowl of peas or go and sit and just cry maybe. But the last thing a person needs when they lose somebody is for you to become a walking Bible. They cannot absorb it. I'm telling you, the absorption, and when we're in a healthy situation and we're not going through grief and loss, we're a big sponge. We learn, we can learn the Bible, we can grow, we can absorb. But in grief, our sponge is so small because we can't absorb. It has to be little things we absorb. Somebody's presence, and they're loving us. And maybe they're cleaning off my countertop and wiping it. And that my sponge can handle that. But maybe my sponge can't say, did the doctors let y'all down? My sponge can't take it. A broken heart can only receive so much. The last stage of grief, and it's different for everybody, it's called acceptance. And I asked Carolyn, she said, you go in and out of that. Is that what? That's what.
Yeah, you do. I mean, it's been over a year now since John passed away, and John was sick for 10 years. I always knew that apart from a miracle, I would not grow old with my husband when the first diagnosis was made. But there's certain things that you have on a intellectual level that never really get down into your gut.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it happens, you can't try and explain it on the intellectual. You really can't. I think that's where you get stuck in the what ifs and the if I had done this and if I had done that, or if we had this treatment. But you can't stay in your gut either, and that's where relying on the Lord comes in. But if somebody had come up to me and said to me in those time periods, "Well, just trust the Lord," I think I would have once again slapped them silly, because you can't deal with the trite answers, the pat phrases. I don't want to hear whenever I was going through all of that. Well, God is good all the time. I know God's good all the time.
But I can't absorb it now.
I can't absorb it whenever I'm looking at my husband in a coffin. Okay.
It's like the person drowning, and they need you to throw them a life raft, and sometimes that life raft is simple, something simple. Wes, if you'll turn off our recording,